Hello friends, welcome back to Seek Before Sleep. Reach out and pick up the nearest thing to you. A cup of water, maybe a pen, your phone resting somewhere near the pillow. Notice just for a moment which hand went to get it. For nearly all of you, without a single thought, it was the right one. The right hand signs your name. The right hand turns the doorknob, lifts the spoon, catches the falling glass. It threads the needle and taps the screen and reaches in the dark for the switch. And here is the strange part, the part almost no one ever stops to consider. You have done this 10,000 times today, and you never once decided to. It simply happened. The right hand went first, quietly, the way it always has, the way it did yesterday, and the way it will tomorrow. An invisible habit, worn so smooth, you cannot even feel it anymore. Now widen the picture. Step back from your own two hands and imagine all the hands in the world tonight. Billions of them folded under blankets, curled around pillows, resting on chests that slowly rise and fall. And if you could somehow ask every one of those people which hand they favor, you would hear the same answer over and over and over again. Right, right, right. About 9 in every 10 of us are right-handed. Only about 1 in 10 leans the other way, with a small handful somewhere in between. 9 to 1. And that ratio is not some quirk of your country or your century. Wherever anyone has looked, every continent, every culture, every people ever carefully studied, the number comes back nearly the same, around 90%. It barely moves. Push on it and it springs back, as far into the past as we can see, as far across the map as we can travel. Humans have leaned to the right. Let that settle for a moment, because it really is a peculiar thing. A whole species more or less agreeing, without ever being asked on which hand to trust. And you might think, well, surely that is just how animals are. Surely every creature has its good side. But here is where it gets interesting. Here is the thread we are going to pull on tonight. It is not how animals are, not at all. Because when researchers go looking for this pattern in our closest living relatives, it simply is not there. A chimpanzee may prefer one hand for a particular task, and a gorilla may favor a paw for reaching into a termite mound. Individuals have their leanings, yes, but as a group, as a whole population, they split much closer, half one way, half the other, with none of the strong, stubborn, lopsided agreement that we have. The great apes never made up their minds. We did, somewhere along the way, in our branch of the family, and no other. The scales tipped, and they tipped hard, and they have stayed tipped ever since. So, something happened. Something happened only to us. And that is the mystery we are going to lie here and turn over slowly, from every side, for as long as it takes to drift off. Because a thing this old, this deep, this woven into the body, does not vanish without a trace. It leaves fingerprints, and the astonishing truth is that we can go looking for those fingerprints in the strangest of places, in the scratches on a fossil tooth worn into the enamel by a slip of a stone blade nearly 2 million years ago, in the way an ancient toolmaker turned a rock in his hands by a riverbank, in the faint lopsided shape pressed into the inside of a skull, and on the cold walls of caves where people who lived and loved and died an unimaginably long time ago pressed a hand to the stone and blue-colored dust around it, leaving a shadow of themselves that is still there today. All of it quietly telling the same story, all of it pointing the same way. But before we go wandering back into all that deep time, let me ask you something the way I always like to. Where are you listening from tonight? I find myself wondering every time, is it late where you are, the small hours, the house gone quiet? Or is it the middle of a grey afternoon, and you have simply had enough of the day and want to slip away from it for a while? Tell me down in the comments where you are and what the clock says on your wall, because I love to picture it. All of you scattered right across the world, in cities and villages and quiet rooms in the countryside, in a dozen different time zones, in the middle of the night and the middle of the day, all settling in at the same moment. All of us, in a way, drifting off together. There is something lovely in that, a whole world of people hands, going still, letting the day go. And if you find these journeys soothing, if you would like to keep them close, the gentlest way to support this little corner of the world is to follow along on Spotify. You will find these stories there, with no ads to jolt you awake, and no music underneath, just the voice and the quiet and the slow unwinding of a long-ago tale. The link is waiting for you down in the description whenever you like. No rush, it is simply there. So, here is what we are going to do tonight. We are going to take that ordinary right hand of yours, the one that reached for the glass, the one resting now beside you, and we are going to follow it backward, back out of this room, back out of this year, back past your parents and their parents, and every generation before them, back before writing, before farming, before the first fire was ever truly tamed, back through nearly 2 million years of bone and stone, to a jaw in an African gorge and a hand on a cave wall in the dark. We are going to gather up every clue the earth has kept for us, one at a time, slowly, and lay them side by side. Teeth, tools, skulls, arm bones, painted hands, even the tangled wiring of the brain itself, and the tiny threads of the genes. And I will tell you now, so there are no surprises at the end of all of it, after we have followed the trail as far as it will go, no one can fully explain what we find. We can trace this ancient split with astonishing care. We can watch it stretch back further and further into the deep past, older than our species, older than we ever imagined. But why it happened, why the right and not the left, and why us and no other creature on earth remains even now only half answered. A question we still carry in our own hands. So get comfortable, let that hand grow heavy on the blanket, and let us begin gently at the very beginning. Before we go hunting for this thing in ancient bones and cave walls, it's worth pausing to ask a simple question. The kind of question that sounds almost too obvious to bother with until you actually try to answer it. What is handedness, really? What is this thing we're chasing back through 2 million years of deep time? You might think you already know. Handedness is the hand you write with, the hand that holds the pen, the one you'd offer for a handshake, the one that finds the light switch in the dark without being told. And yes, that's the part we notice. But it turns out that the hand is only the most visible corner of something much larger, something that runs through your whole body quietly, like a grain running through a piece of wood. 'Cause you don't just have a dominant hand, you almost certainly have a dominant foot, too. Think about it for a moment. There in the dark, if a ball rolled toward you right now and you had to kick it, which foot would swing? Most people don't have to think very long. There's a leg that steps up to do the job, and a leg that stays planted to keep you steady. The one that kicks, the one that leads when you climb a stair without thinking. That's your dominant foot, and for most of us, it leans the very same way the hand does. It doesn't stop there. You have a preferred eye. When you line up a camera, or peer through a keyhole, or point at a distant star and close one eye to aim, there's an eye your brain trusts to do the aiming. Cover one and then the other, and you can feel it. The way one view sits truer than the other. That's your dominant eye, and astonishingly, you even seem to have a favored ear. The ear you turn toward a quiet voice, the one you lift the phone to, almost by reflex, a whole body gently leaning one way, not a single hand making a single choice, but a soft, consistent tilt from head to foot, hand, foot, eye, ear, all of them more often than not agreeing on a side. So that's the first surprise. Handedness isn't one thing, it's a whole leaning body, and the hand is just the part that carries a pen. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. Here's the part that has puzzled scientists for a very long time, and the part I want you to hold on to as we drift further into the night, because the deepest mystery isn't that any one of us has a favored side, it's that almost all of us have the same one. Let me try to draw that distinction gently, because it's the whole heart of the story. Plenty of animals favor a paw. A cat will reach into a jar with the same paw again and again. A parrot will lift food to its beak with a preferred foot. Even a mouse, given a narrow tube of seed, will tend to reach in with one little hand more than the other. This is common in the animal world. Lots of creatures pick a side, but, and this is the crucial word, they pick as individuals. In a room full of cats, roughly half will favor the left paw and half the right. The preferences are real, but they scatter. They point in every direction at once, like a crowd of people, each facing whichever way they happen to be standing. There's no agreement, no shared lean, no sense that the whole species has tipped together toward one side. That agreement, that shared tipping, is the thing that seems to belong almost entirely to us. Around 9 in every 10, humans favor the right hand. Not half, not most. 9 in 10, across every society anyone has ever studied, as far back as we're able to look. It isn't just that you have a dominant hand, it's that you and the person beside you and the millions of people scattered across the dark side of the planet tonight, drifting off with you, mostly share the exact same one. A whole species leaning the same way. As far as we know, nothing else on Earth does this quite so strongly. To feel how odd that is, look at our closest living relatives. You might expect the great apes to show something like our pattern, and for a long time, people assumed they would. But when researchers watched them carefully, chimpanzees and gorillas and bonobos reaching for food, fishing for termites, cracking nuts, the picture that came back was much softer than ours. Some studies suggest they hover near an even split, close to 50-50, with preferences that are weaker and less consistent than our own. An individual chimp might favor a hand for one task and switch for another. The lean is there faintly, but it doesn't gather into a single direction the way ours does. It stays scattered, individual, quiet. Whatever happened to tilt an entire species so hard to one side, it seems to have happened on our branch of the family and not on theirs. Now, before we go any further, I want to soften one idea, because it's easy to picture handedness as a simple switch, right or left, one box or the other. But that's not quite how it works, and the truth is gentler and more interesting than that. Handedness is a spectrum, a gradient, not a gate. Think of it as a long, slow slope. At one end, the strong right-handers, the people who could barely sign their name with the left hand if their life depended on it. Then, a little further along, the weak right-handers, right-leaning but flexible, happy to let the other hand help. In the middle sit the mixed-handers, the near ambidextrous, the people who deal cards with one hand and brush their teeth with the other, and have never quite been able to say which side they belong to. Then on toward the weak left-handers, and finally the strong left-handers at the far end of the slope. It isn't two camps, it's degrees, shades, a whole soft range of leaning, and each of us sits somewhere along it. Hold on to that idea of a spectrum, because it will matter a great deal later when we go looking for the genes behind all this. If handedness were a simple switch, you might hope to find a simple switch inside us, one gene flipped this way or that. But a gradient asks for a gradient of causes. Keep it in the back of your mind as you sink deeper into the pillow. It'll come back to us. So this is the shape of the thing we're chasing. Not just a hand, but a whole leaning body. Not just an individual quirk, but a signature stamped across an entire species. A soft, consistent planet-wide tilt to the right that our closest cousins simply don't share. And here is the quiet promise in all of it. The reason we can even hope to follow this trail into the deep past. Because our bias is a whole population signature, because it's shared by so many of us so consistently, it can't help but leave marks. A single left-handed cat leaves no trace on the world, but a whole species that reaches, cuts, strikes and paints with the same hand over and over for hundreds of thousands of years, that leaves fingerprints in the scratches on ancient teeth, in the flakes struck from stone, in the faint lopsided cast of old skulls, and in the hands pressed to cave walls in the flickering dark. The lean is old, and because it's so widely shared, it is remarkably something we can find. As we'll see, it left its fingerprints everywhere. We only have to learn how to read them. So, let's ask the question directly, the one that's been quietly gathering behind everything we've said so far. How far back does the lean actually go? We know it's shared by nearly everyone alive tonight, but was it there before us? Before there were any people quite like you and me at all? Before there was such a thing as Homo sapiens, our own particular kind of human, reaching for the fire in the dark? Because that's the strange and wonderful part. When you follow a thread like this backward, you keep expecting it to fray. You expect to reach some morning, some early chapter, where the right-hand tilt simply hasn't shown up yet, where our ancestors are just as evenly split as the apes we talked about a moment ago, favoring this side or that with no pattern at all. And somewhere on that road, you think the trail will finally run cold. The scratches will stop, the bones will fall silent, and you'll be standing at the edge of the very first day, the world tipped gently to the right. So, where is that edge? How deep can we actually dig before the evidence gives out? To find out, we have to travel to one particular place on Earth, a long, dry canyon cut into the plains of northern Tanzania in East Africa, called Olduvai Gorge. If there's a single cradle for stories like this one, it's here. Picture a great gash in the land, its walls striped in bands of pale grey, and rust and ash, layer stacked on layer, each one a page from a different age of the world. Rain and time have sliced down through all of it, exposing the deep past like the edge of a cut cake. And buried in those layers, patient beyond imagining, lie the bones and the tools of some of the earliest members of our own family. People have been walking this gorge for a century now, eyes down, waiting for the ground to give something up. And one day, it gave up a jaw. Not a whole skull, not a skeleton, just an upper jaw. The technical word is a maxilla, which is simply the bone that holds your top row of teeth, the one you'd run your tongue along right now, behind your lip. This particular maxilla has a name, or really, a label, the kind archaeologists give their finds. It's called O65, and it belonged to a very early kind of human, one that scientists usually place near the base of our own genus, Homo. Often, it's linked to a species called Homo habilis, sometimes gently nicknamed the handyman, an ancestor small and strange, and yet recognizably one of ours. Now, here is where I need you to slow your breathing a little, because I'm about to say a number, and it's a number that's genuinely hard for a human mind to hold. This jaw is roughly 1.8 million years old. Sit with that for a moment. Not 1,000, not 18,000, not 180,000, 8 million years. Let the zeros stretch out into the dark. If you tried to count those years off, one at a time, one every second, you would be counting for more than 50 years without sleeping, without stopping, and you still wouldn't be done. Every pyramid, every empire, every war, and every love story anyone has ever told you about happened in the thinnest sliver at the very end of that span. All of recorded history is a single held breath at the finish. And this jaw was already ancient, already turning to stone in the ground for essentially all of the time before that breath. That's the abyss we're peering into. That's how far down the gorge goes. And here's what a team of researchers found when they looked closely at the front teeth of that jaw. Tiny marks, little scratches, cut into the enamel on the outward-facing side of the teeth, the side that would have sat just behind the lips. And the way those marks were angled, the direction they consistently tilted, pointed to something almost impossible to believe from so deep in time. They pointed to a right-handed individual. Not a guess about the species in general, but a clue about this one creature. This one person, if we can call them that, working day after day with the right hand. The work was led by a researcher named David Fryer of the University of Kansas, together with his colleagues, and they published it back in 2016. And what makes 065 so quietly astonishing is not just its age, but its status. As far as we know, it is the earliest direct evidence for handedness anywhere in the entire fossil record. Not the earliest hint, not the earliest statistical whisper from a pile of stones, which we'll come to. The earliest actual fingerprint left in a body, saying, "This one leaned the way you lean." Now I want to be careful here, the way good scientists are careful, because this is deep time. Science and certainty is a thing we should hold loosely. It's one jaw, one individual. You can't take a single person and declare that an entire world tipped to the right. The researchers themselves wouldn't claim that. What they can say, what the mark on that tooth seems to whisper, is that right-handedness of the kind we recognize was already possible, already present in a creature that lived nearly 2 million years ago. But let that possibility open up slowly, because it's a staggering one. It means the right-hand preference may be almost 2 million years old, older than our own species by a vast margin. Sapiens wouldn't appear for the better part of that whole stretch of time, older quite possibly than the true mastery of fire, than the habit of gathering around a controlled flame at night, older than language as you know it, older than any word ever spoken in any tongue that could be called a language in our sense. Before the sentence, before the story, before the name, there was already the reach, already the favored side, already a small creature in a dry African valley, picking up a stone, holding a scrap of food, and choosing without a single thought about it, the right hand, the very same hand you'd reach with tonight if you rolled over and fumbled for a glass of water in the dark. Think about that thread for a second. Not a metaphor, not a poem, but a real physical continuity. Some deep leaning in the body, some quiet asymmetry carried forward across nearly 2 million years from that jaw in the gorge. Through countless generations, you will never picture all the fulums, way down into you lying here drifting off. This creature already reach the way you reach. The gesture is that old. The gesture might be older than almost everything we think of as human. And of course, if you're anything like me, right about now, a very reasonable little question has started tugging at the edge of your sleepiness. A skeptical one, a good one. How on earth could anyone possibly know that? I mean, really, think about it. Here is a fossil, a fragment of jaw, worn and mineralized, nearly 2 million years dead. There's no film of this creature at work, no account, no observer, no witness of any kind, and yet a team of scientists looked at some faint scratches on the surface of a tooth and felt confident enough to say, this one favored the right hand. How? What could scratches on a tooth possibly have to do with which hand someone held a tool in? The tooth isn't even a hand. It's at the wrong end of the body entirely. It sounds honestly like a kind of magic trick or a leap of faith dressed up in a lab coat, but it isn't. It's one of the most elegant and, frankly, one of the most peculiar pieces of detective work in all of the study of human origins. There's a real method here, a repeatable one, tested and confirmed. Once you understand it, you'll never look at your own front teeth quite the same way again, and you'll find yourself doing a small, slightly odd gesture in the dark to picture it. So, that's exactly where we're going next, down into the mouth of a creature 2 million years gone, to learn how a slip of the hand at dinner became a message we could still read. So, picture the moment. It's an ordinary afternoon, if such a word even means anything. 2 million years ago, the light is thick and golden. The air smells of dust and river and green things breaking down in the heat. Our early human is hungry, and there is food to deal with. A strip of meat maybe, or a length of tough hide that needs working, softening, cutting down to size. And here is the thing to hold in your mind as you lie there. They have no table, no cutting board, no third hand. They have only what you have right now, tucked under the blanket, 2 hands, a mouth, and a sharp edge of stone. So they improvise the way we all still do when we run out of hands. They take that strip of meat, and they clamp one end of it between their front teeth. The teeth become a vice, a living clamp, holding the food steady. Then one hand grips the loose end and pulls it taut, drawing it tight so it doesn't slip, and the other hand comes up with a little flake of stone, an edge freshly struck and wickedly sharp, and it saws right there, close to the lips, cutting off a mouthful or trimming the hide, working the blade back and forth just in front of the face. Researchers gave this little maneuver a name. They call it stuff and cut. You stuffed the material into your mouth and you cut it free near the lips. And it wasn't clumsy or unusual. It was simply how you ate, how you processed a carcass, how you got through a meal when your teeth were as much a tool as anything you carried. People did it constantly, day after day, year after year, whole lifetimes of pulling and sawing, right there at the mouth. And now you can probably already feel where this is going, because when you're dragging a razor edge of stone back and forth an inch from your own teeth, thousands of times over a lifetime, you are going to miss. The hand slips. The blade skates past the meat, and just for an instant, kisses the enamel on the front of a tooth. It's nothing, a tiny scrape. You wouldn't even feel it, wouldn't pause your chewing, but the stone is harder than the tooth, and it leaves a mark. A faint scratch drawn across the shining front surface of the enamel. Scientists have a phrase for those marks too. They call them labial striations. Striations just mean scratches, little parallel lines. And labial, that comes from the Latin word for lip, the same root as labial in the way a linguist might use it. So, labial striations simply means the scratches on the lip-facing side of your teeth, the front, the part that shows when you smile, not the chewing surface, not the back, but the outward face, exactly where a blade coming in from outside the mouth would graze if it slipped. One scratch means nothing, but over a lifetime of stuff and cut, they gather. Dozens of them faint and overlapping, etched into the enamel and then frozen there, because enamel doesn't heal and doesn't grow back. And here is the quiet miracle of it. When that mouth finally goes still and the jaw settles into the earth, and 1,000,000 years of dust and stone press down on top of it, those little scratches are still there, waiting, holding their angle, because that's the secret. It isn't the scratches themselves that tell you which hand. Both hands, after all, leave scratches. Both slip. If all you had was a scuffed tooth, you'd know only that someone had been cutting near their mouth, and nothing more. No, the thing that carries the message, the part that betrays the working hand, is subtler than that. It's the angle, the tilt, the direction. Each little line runs across the tooth. Think about how the geometry works slowly, the way you trace a shape in the dark. If you are right-handed, your right hand holds the stone, and it comes across your body, sweeping in from the right side, drawing down and across toward the left as you cut. So every time the blade slips, it scrapes at a consistent slant, leaning one particular way, like the strokes of right-leaning handwriting. Now flip it. A left-hander brings the blade in from the other side entirely, and their scratches lean the opposite way. The exact mirror image. Same behavior, same teeth, but the hand that held the stone signs its own signature in the tilt of the lines. Right-handers, one direction, left-handers, the reverse. The mouth becomes a page, and the working hand writes on it without ever meaning to. Now, you might be thinking, that's a lovely idea, but how could anyone be sure? Couldn't the scratches just fall any old way? And this is the part I find genuinely reassuring, because the researchers wondered exactly the same thing. So, they didn't just guess, they tested it. They took stone tools and dental casts, and they recreated the whole business by hand, cutting, sawing, deliberately doing the stuff and cut motion, and watching where the slips landed and cut which way they leaned. And when a right-handed person did it, the scratches tilted the right-handed way over and over. When the motion came from the other side, the mirror pattern appeared again and again. It's repeatable. Do the behavior, get the signal. That's what lifts it out of the realm of a nice story and into the realm of evidence. You can go into a lab today and produce the very same marks, and they come out pointing the way they should. So when David Fire and his colleagues looked at the front teeth of Ode 65, that ancient jaw from old Uv, and saw those striations leaning in the right-handed direction, they weren't reading tea leaves. They were reading a mark whose meaning had been checked and rechecked against living hands, doing the same slow work. And here's the part that gives the whole thing weight. O is not alone. Those labial striations, those little tilted scratches, they turn up again and again as you move forward through time, on the teeth of later humans, on European hominins from long after Olduvai, the early pre-Neanderthal peoples, and on the Neanderthals themselves, but we'll come back to them because they have a whole chapter of this story to themselves, and it's worth the wait. For now, just hold the shape of it. A scattering of scratched teeth across hundreds of thousands of years, across different kinds of human, in different lands, and the scratches keep leaning the same way. Overwhelmingly, the right-handed way, a chain of tiny marks, each one an accident, all of them whispering the same thing. And when you sit with that, it's a strange and gentle thing to marvel at, because nobody meant to leave a message. There was no monument, no carving, no deliberate record. There was only a hungry creature at the end of a long day, doing the ordinary thing they'd done 10,000 times before, pulling a strip of food tight and cutting off a bite. And their hands slipped, that's all. A small, clumsy human slip, the kind of thing you'd forget before you'd finished chewing. But the enamel remembered. It held that clumsy instant, and the one after it, and the one after that, and it kept them safe, through nearly 2 million years of silence. And now, all this time later, we can lean in close and read in the tilt of those faint lines something almost unbearably intimate. Not just that a creature lived and ate, but how its mind and its body were wired together. The dominant hand, the favored side, the same lean, maybe that guides your own hand toward the light switch in the dark. A slip of the hand at dinner turned into a permanent word about how someone was made. The gesture didn't vanish. It fossilized, and it was waiting for us, patient as stone, to finally come and understand it. And here's the lovely thing about the deep past. It rarely leaves you just one message. If you're patient, and you're lucky, it leaves you two written in two completely different hands, so to speak, in two completely different materials. And when those two messages happen to say the same thing, you start to feel something settle in your chest, a quiet click of confidence, because the teeth, for all their strange eloquence, are only one witness. And a single witness in a courtroom this old is never quite enough. So let's leave the teeth behind now and pick up something else, something even older, something you could hold in the palm of your hand. Picture a stone, not a special stone, just a river cobble, smooth and grey, the kind you'd skip across the water without a second thought, rounded by 100,000 years of current, worn to a comfortable heaviness. Now picture an early human sitting cross-legged in the dirt, cradling that cobble in one hand and a second, harder stone in the other. And then, with a short, practiced motion, they strike the two together. Tap, a sharp crack, and a thin sliver of stone pops off, falls into the dust, and catches the light along an edge so keen it could open skin. That sliver is a flake, and that flake, plain as it looks, is one of the oldest things our kind ever made on purpose. We call these the old tools, named for Olduvai Gorge, that same green scar of a valley in Tanzania where the jaw came from. There's nothing fancy here, no polish, no shape carved lovingly over hours, just a core, which is the mother stone the flakes come off of, and the flakes themselves, which are the working blades, struck, gathered, used, dropped. And this simple act of knocking one stone against another to peel off a cutting edge, this has a name too, napping. Say it slowly. It sounds like the thing it describes, a small, dry tapping word. Now, why would a heap of ancient stone chips have anything to say about which hand someone favored? That was the question a researcher named Nicholas Toth started turning over decades ago, and his insight was so simple and so human that once you hear it, you can almost feel it in your own hands. When you nap a core, you don't just hit it once and walk away. You work your way around it. You strike a flake. Then you turn the core a little and strike again, and turn and strike, chasing the good edge around the stone. And here's the thing. If you're right-handed, the way you hold the core in your left hand and turn it, and the way you swing the hammerstone in your right, they nudge you into a habit. You tend to rotate the core in one consistent direction, not because anyone taught you to, just because that's the way the body wants to move when the right hand is doing the delicate striking. And that habit, that gentle rotational drift, leaves a faint fingerprint on the flakes that come off. Think about the outside of that river cobble. It's covered in a kind of weathered skin, a dull, crusty surface, worn smooth by water and time. Nappers call that the cortex. As you work around the core in your favored direction, the flakes you strike carry that leftover skin on one side more often than the other. The orientation of the strikes leans a certain way. It's subtle, almost invisible, but over many, many flakes, the lean starts to show. So Toth did something wonderfully patient. He took ancient Olduvai flakes, real ones struck by hands that turned to dust well over 1 million years ago, and he looked at which way that faint bias pointed, and he found a tilt, a lean, toward the pattern a right-hander would leave. In his sample, it came out to something like 56% one way, 44% the other. Now sit with those numbers for a moment, because they matter, and they matter partly for how modest they are. 56 to 44 is not a landslide. It is not the stones shouting, it's barely more than a whisper. If you flipped a coin a handful of times, you might get a split like that by pure chance. And this is exactly where we have to be careful and honest and a little humble, because napping signals are statistical. That's the whole heart of it. What does that actually mean, statistical? It means no single flake will ever tell you anything. Pick up one flake, one lonely sliver of stone, and it is silent. A right-hander could easily have made it. So could a left-hander. So could a right-hander having an off day, turning the core the wrong way for no reason at all. One flake proves nothing. It's only when you gather them by the 100, by the 1,000, and count them all up together that a direction starts to emerge from the noise. The individual stones say nothing. The crowd of them murmurs, and archaeologists, being a careful and quarrelsome bunch in the best possible way, have argued about this for years. Some think Thoth's signal is real and meaningful. Others point out how many other things can nudge a flake: the shape of the raw stone, the particular task, the individual quirks of one toolmaker on one afternoon. It's genuinely debated, so we won't pretend it's settled. We won't say the stones prove anything on their own. On their own, they only lean. But, and this is the part worth staying awake just a little longer for, they don't have to stand on their own. Because remember where we've just been. We spent all that time with the teeth, those angled scratches in the enamel, the fossilized slip of a blade near the lips, all pointing to a hand that worked on the right. And that was one window into the deep past, one method, looking at one kind of evidence from one strange angle. Now here comes the stone, a completely different material, a completely different kind of trace, left by a completely different action. Not a slip near the mouth, but a deliberate strike against a core, studied by different people, using different logic, prone to entirely different mistakes. Two windows that have nothing to do with each other. Two witnesses who never met, who speak different languages, who don't even know the other one is in the room, and they say the same thing. That's the moment the hair stands up a little. Because when two independent methods that could each be wrong in their own separate ways, happen to agree, the signal gets sturdier. It's much harder to explain away. A flaw in how you read teeth wouldn't also sneak into how you count flakes. A bias in the stones wouldn't tidily match a bias in the enamel by accident. When the errors are unrelated but the answer is the same, you start to trust the answer. Not completely, never completely. Not in science this old, but more meaningfully more. The teeth lean right. The stones lean right deep, deep in time, both of them quietly nodding in the same direction. And so we can let the argument rest there, gently unfinished, but leaning. Not a proof, a convergence. Two faint voices from nearly 2 million years ago, saying the same soft word. So let this be the picture you carry down into sleep tonight. It's morning somewhere warm, a very long time ago. There's a stream nearby, low and slow over pale stones, catching the early light. And there's someone sitting beside it. One of us, more or less, not thinking about any of this, of course, not thinking about being remembered, just working. A cobble, balanced in the left hand, turned this way and that, and a hammerstone in the right, coming down in that small sure, practiced motion. Tap. A flake falls. Turn the stone. Tap another, turning it always the same way without noticing, without a name for it, already favoring the very side you favor, the same side that reached for the light switch tonight, the same side that will reach for it in the morning, a gesture that old, a lean that patient. Tap tap, and the water just keeps moving. Watch those hands a moment longer before we leave the stream. The stone turns, the wrist rolls, the strike lands just so. There's nothing hurried about it. It's the kind of skill that lives below thought, the way you butter toast without looking, the way your fingers find the light switch in the dark. And that's the thing worth holding on to as the light comes up over the water. A movement that practiced that automatic isn't really coming from the hand at all. The hand is only the end of the line. Somewhere behind those eyes, in the soft grey folds packed inside the skull, something is doing the steering. So, let's follow the signal inward, from the hand to the brain that drives it to the bone that once wrapped around that brain and in its own quiet way remembers its shape. Because here is a strange and lovely fact. A skull is not just a hard box. On the inside, along its curved inner wall, it carries a faint impression of the brain that once pressed against it for a lifetime. The brain is soft, and it fills its case snugly, and over years it leaves the gentlest of imprints on the bone, the ridges, the grooves, the swell of one region, the dip of another. And that means that if you take an old fossil skull and you fill the empty inside with something that sets, or nowadays, if you simply scan it and let a computer pour a virtual filling into that hollow, what comes out is a rough model of the outer surface of a brain that stopped thinking hundreds of thousands of years ago. Researchers have a plain name for this. They call it an endocast, an inside cast, a ghost of a brain, read from the walls of the room it used to live in. Now you might imagine a brain as a tidy, symmetrical thing, two matching halves left and right, mirror images like two walnut halves pressed together. That's the picture we carry. But it isn't quite true. Human brains are subtly lopsided, not dramatically, not in a way you'd ever feel, but if you measure carefully, there's a gentle diagonal twist to the whole organ, and researchers actually have a word for it. They call it the torque. Picture a cloth being wrung out just slightly, just once. That faint spiral. In most people, the twist runs a particular way. The right front of the brain bulges a little further forward than the left front does, and at the back it flips the left rear of the brain, the region called the occipital area, down toward the base of your skull, pushes a little further back than the right does. Front, right, forward, back, left, back. A soft diagonal lean built into the whole thing. Those little protrusions, the bit that bulges forward on one side and backward on the other, have a name too. They're called patelius. It's a quiet, almost botanical word for a very physical fact. One corner of the brain reaches out a touch beyond its opposite number, like a petal that opens slightly wider than the rest. And when you find them together, right frontal reaching forward, left occipital reaching back, that's the classic human torque. The Rungloth twist. You are in all likelihood carrying exactly that shape right now against the pillow. And here's why it matters for our story. In living people, this particular pattern, right front forward and left back, tends to go along with being right-handed. It's a statistical link, not an iron law. Plenty of exceptions. But across large groups of people, that twist and the right hand travel together, often enough that researchers treat one as a clue to the other, which opens a wonderful possibility. If the shape of a living right-hander's brain leaves that signature, and the brain leaves its signature on the inside of the skull, and the skull can fossilize and last for ages, then a fossil endocast might just preserve a whisper of which hand a creature favored tens of thousands of years after every muscle and nerve has vanished. The tool told us one thing, the teeth told us another. Now the brain itself might lean in and murmur the same word. So does it travel to the island of Java, in what's now Indonesia, to a place called Inandong, along an old river terrace. From sites like this, we have skulls of Homo erectus, an upright wandering tool using human ancestor who walked the earth for well over 1 million years. When researchers made endocasts of several of these Gandong skulls and looked for the twist, they found it not in some faint wishful way, but the real modern pattern. In one study, 4 of the 5 and Gondong endocasts they examined showed the same right, frontal left occipital patalas that you'd expect from a right-handed person alive today. The brain twist, it seems, like the bias in the hand and the bias in the stone, runs deep, older than us, woven into a kind of human that is no longer here. But let's be honest and careful here, the way we've tried to be all along, because this is the quiet, contested edge of the science. An endocast is not a brain. It's an impression of the outside of a brain, taken second-hand from bone, and bone is a rough recorder. The imprint can be faint. 2 careful researchers can look at the same lumpy cast and measure the twist a little differently and argue politely about what counts as a real patia and what sleet, just the ordinary bumpiness of an old fossil. So no single endocast settles anything. These are clues, read gently, and the reading is debated. Hold them loosely, and there's that same humbling contrast we keep running into, the one that shadowed us with the hands and the tools. Great apes, our chimp and gorilla cousins, are not perfectly symmetrical either. Take an individual ape brain, and you may well find some lean, some asymmetry, one side a touch bigger than the other. But here's the difference, and it's the difference that keeps mattering. In apes, the leaning doesn't line up across the whole group. One tilts this way, another tilts that way, and it more or less washes out. There's no strong shared population-wide direction to it. In humans, there is. We don't just each have a lopsided brain. We tend to have it lopsided the same way together as a species, which is precisely the pattern we saw with handedness itself. Not the fact of a preference, but the strange agreement about which side the apes lean. We lean together, and so the trail we've been following turns out to run deeper than skin, deeper than habit, deeper even than bone, shaped by a lifetime of use. It's not only in the scratched teeth, where a slip of the blade at dinner froze a message in the enamel. It's not only in the struck stones, where thousands of flakes whisper a direction. It's shaped into the very form of the thing that does the choosing. A faint, diagonal rung-cloth twist, pressed into the soft folds behind your eyes, and pressed again, ever so lightly, into the curved inner wall of the skull that holds them. A lopsidedness, so gentle you have never once felt it, and yet it may be one of the oldest, most personal signatures of what you are. You're carrying it right now. As you lie there in the dark, half listening, drifting, the right front of your brain reaches just a little further forward than the left, and the left rear reaches just a little further back. The same soft twist a Homo erectus carried along a Japanese riverbank in a world with no words for any of this. The split isn't only in the hand you'd reach with, it's in the shape of the mind that would reach, and it's resting quietly on the pillow with you tonight. If that lean is truly a deep inheritance, something carried in the shared architecture of the human body, then it shouldn't belong to us alone. It should turn up in other kinds of human too. And there were other kinds. For most of the story we've been telling tonight, our species was not the only one walking the earth. So, let's go and meet our closest lost relatives and see which hand they favored. Picture a valley in Ice Age Europe. The air is cold enough to see your breath. Along a ridge above a frozen river, a small group of people is working. Real people with families, with fire, with grief. These are the Neanderthals. And I want to be careful with them for a moment, because for a long time we told an unkind story about them. We drew them as hunched, dim-witted brutes, a kind of failed, rough draft of ourselves. That picture is simply wrong. The Neanderthals were a separate lineage of humans, a distinct branch of the family, and they were extraordinarily skilled. They knapped fine stone tools. They hunted enormous, dangerous animals up close, which takes nerve and planning, and trust in the person beside you. They cared for their injured. They buried some of their dead. They lived across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, through some of the harshest conditions this planet has thrown at anyone. And then, tens of thousands of years ago, they were gone. A whole way of being human vanished from the world, but they left a rich record behind them. Bones, tools, whole skeletons, teeth still set in ancient jaws. And hidden in that record is the very thing we've been chasing all night, their own handedness signal, because it turns out the Neanderthals leaned the same way we do. Consider a skeleton found in southwestern France, known as Rigoru 1. It's one of the more complete Neanderthal skeletons ever recovered, and when researchers studied its arm bones, they noticed something. The two arms don't match. The right arm is markedly more robust than the left. The bone is thicker, stronger, more heavily built, carrying the deep signature of a limb that was worked harder again and again, year after year. And this is a beautiful little fact of biology, so let me linger on it. Bone is not a dead scaffold. It's alive, and it listens to what you do. Use a limb hard and often, and the bone quietly reinforces itself, thickening where the muscles pull. It's the same reason a tennis player's racket arm can end up visibly stronger boned than the other. So when one arm on an ancient skeleton is built noticeably heavier than its partner, that lopsidedness is a record, the physical memory of a person who spent a lifetime favoring one side for the heavy, skilled work of staying alive. And in Rigora 1, that favored side was the right. Its right-handedness, written not in teeth this time, but straight into the thickness of the bone. That's one individual, one person, one skeleton, one strong right arm. On its own, it could be a coincidence, but it isn't alone. Remember the teeth. Remember those tiny scratches we met earlier, the labial striations, the little slanted grooves left on the front of the teeth when someone grips food or hide in their mouth and slices near the lips with a stone blade, and the blade now and then nicks the enamel. The tilt of those scratches records the working hand. Well, the same marks show up on Neanderthal teeth at a cave site called El Sidron in Asturias, in northern Spain, and at many other European Neanderthal sites. Researchers have read the scratches on those ancient front teeth, and they lean overwhelmingly the same way, cut after cut, mouth after mouth, tilted in the direction a right-handed person leaves behind. Now, here's where it becomes genuinely striking, and where I want to hold the numbers gently, because this is deep-time science, and the samples are small. But when researchers gather up the Neanderthals, they can actually test. The ones with teeth clear enough to read, the arms complete enough to measure, the right-handed majority they find looks remarkably close to our own. Close to that stubborn 90% we opened with a separate kind of human on its own branch of the tree. and the sampled remains suggest they tip toward the right at almost exactly the same rate we do. Sit with what that implies for a moment, because it's the quiet bombshell of the whole night. We and the Neanderthals are not the same species. We share an ancestor, yes, but that ancestor lived a very long time ago. The lineages that would become us, and the lineages that would become them, appear to have parted, ways well over 500,000 years ago. Some estimates pushing considerably further back. For all the time since we grew apart, different bodies, different faces, different corners of the world, and yet both branches carry the same rightward lean at nearly the same strength. Think about what that means. If two separated branches of a family both share a trait, the simplest explanation is that they didn't each invent it on their own. They inherited it from the ancestor they had in common before they split. So the right-hand bias is very likely older than the split itself, older than us, older than the Neanderthals, already present in the shared grandparent population from which both of us descend more than 500,000 years ago. And when you remember that jaw from earlier in our journey, that 1,800,000-year-old maxilla from Olduvai, its front teeth scratched by a right hand, you start to suspect this lean runs older still, far, far older, not a recent development at all, but something close to a birthright of our whole branch of humanity. And this quietly dismantles a comfortable assumption. It would be easy to think that right-handedness is a product of the world we built, that we favor the right hand because of schooling, because of the way pens and scissors and door cork knobs are designed, because writing runs a certain direction, because culture nudged us all into line. The Neanderthals had no schools, no pens, no alphabets, no factories stamping out right-handed tools. They shared none of our modern civilization, and they leaned right anyway, just as hard as we do. So whatever tips the human hand to the right, it was already there, long before culture, long before writing, long before cities, already there, before we and the Neanderthals ever became two different kinds of people. It isn't a habit the modern world taught us. It's an inheritance we were handed deep in the past and simply never put down. There's something tender in that, I think, and something a little haunting, and it's a good thought to rest on tonight. The Neanderthals are gone. They have been gone from the earth for tens of thousands of years. An entire people, an entire way of being human, faded out of the world so completely that for a long while we didn't even know they'd been here. And yet, they were not so unlike you. They felt the cold and moved toward the fire. They made things with their hands and were proud of them. They loved children and buried the people they lost. And when one of them reached out for a tool, resting by the hearth, for a strip of meat, for a stone to shape, for the small, warm hand of a child in the dark, they reached far more often than not with the right. The very same hand you would use tonight, without a single thought, to reach for the lamp beside your bed and turn out the light. Across all that distance of time, across the gulf between two different kinds of human, that one small gesture is shared. Two of us separated by 500,000 years, reaching into the dark with the same hand. The lean, it seems, is older than either of us. And it wasn't only carried in the hands and the teeth and the bones, it was carved, as we've begun to see, into the very shape of the thinking mind. And there is one more place it left its mark, waiting for us on the walls of the deep caves. So come down with me now, out of the daylight and into the dark, past the mouth of the cave, where the last of the sun still reaches, and on deeper, along a passage that narrows and turns, until the air goes cool and still and smells of wet stone. Your footsteps stop echoing. The world outside falls away. This is the kind of place people walked into more than 30,000 years ago, carrying a little flame that guttered and swelled against the walls. And in that flickering light, they left something behind. Something that has been waiting in the blackness ever since for someone to bring a light back and see it. Picture the moment. An Ice Age person somewhere in what we now call France, in the caves of Chauvet or Petma or Gargas, or on the far side of the world, in a canyon in Argentina, at a place we now call Cueva de las Manos, the cave of the hands. They gather up a mouthful of pigment, ground ochre for red, burnt charcoal for black, mixed with a little water, or spit into a paint. They lift one hand and press it flat against the cold rock fingers, spread wide, and then they blow. They spray the pigment out across the back of the hand, in a fine mist, so it settles on the wall all around it. And when they lift the hand away, it is not a painted hand, the opposite. The wall is colored, and where the hand was, the bare rock shows as through, in the perfect shape of a hand, a hollow, a silhouette in reverse. Archaeologists call it a negative stencil, and it is one of the oldest and most human things anyone has ever left behind. A person quietly saying, across an unimaginable gulf of time, I was here. This is my hand, and these are not a handful of stray marks. At Chauvet alone, in that famous cave of painted lions and horses, there are hand stencils and handprints, and hundreds of palm prints pressed into the rock, some of them reaching back 30,000 years and more, older than the last great cold of the Ice Age, older than farming, older than almost anything you could name. Whole walls in cave after cave, dappled with the ghosts of hands. Try to sit with that number for a moment as you lie there. 30,000 years. A hand lifted, pressed, and lowered again in a single quiet breath. And the shape of it still waiting in the dark today, long after everyone who ever knew that person has been forgotten. Now, here is the thing that makes these hands more than beautiful. When you gather them up, when you count them across cave after cave, a pattern rises out of the dark. The overwhelming majority of these stencils are left hands, not right, left. And at Cueva de las Manos, on one great crowded panel, where hundreds of hands overlap like a slow applause frozen in stone, someone did the counting. On the order of 800 left hands, and against them only a few dozen right. Roughly 3 left hands for everyone right. That same lopsidedness turns up again and again, at site after site, on wall after wall, separated by continents and thousands of years. A forest of left hands, and you might, drifting here in the dark, start to wonder why. The answer is so simple, it feels like a held breath. Think about what you actually have to do to make one of these. You press one hand to the wall, and with the other hand you do the delicate work. You hold the pigment. You control the spray. You aim the mist, just so, around every finger. That second hand is the skilled one, the clever one, the one you trust. And which hand do most of us press flat and sacrifice to the wall? And which do we keep back to do the careful work? A right-handed person naturally presses the left hand to the stone and works with the right. So a wall, crowded with left-hand stencils, is in the quietest possible way a wall crowded with right-handers. These paintings are a census account of human hands taken tens of thousands of years ago in the deep of the earth by people who had no idea they were leaving us the answer. And the answer, once again, is right-handed. And if these deep-time mysteries are the kind of thing that pulls gently at your mind as you drift off, these hushed, half-answered puzzles out of the far past, I'll mention softly that we've actually written a whole book about prehistoric secrets, like these little stories from the dark, backward, and a bim of time, told in the same calm voice you're listening to now. You can find it over on our website at sleepytimehistory.com. And there's a discount on it this week if you'd like to take it to bed with you. And now back into the cave, because the hands on the wall are not done with us yet. They keep one more secret, and it is a strange one. Go to Gargus in the foothills of the Pyrenees. Here, the walls are crowded with these stencils too, hundreds of them, red and black. But look closely at the hands, and something is wrong. Something is missing on a great many of them. The fingers are not whole, a digit is shortened, a fingertip simply is not there. Whole fingers seem to end too soon or vanish entirely, leaving stubby, incomplete hands stamped over and over into the rock. And nobody knows for certain why. Some researchers think the fingers were only folded down, bent against the palm before the pigment was blown. So the missing digits are an illusion, a trick of a hand held in a deliberate shape. Perhaps a language of gestures, a sign, a signal, a code between hunters that we can no longer read. Others wonder if the fingers were truly gone, lost to frostbite in that brutal Ice Age cold, or to disease, or to some ritual of sacrifice we cannot imagine. We simply do not know. The people who could have told us have been dust for longer than we can properly feel, and so the incomplete hands stay there in the dark, pressing their unanswered question against the stone, and we are left only to wonder in the quiet. Some doors in these caves were never meant to open, and this may be one of them. But step back now, out of the flicker, and let's gather up everything we've carried through the night so far, because look at what we have. We have the scratches on the teeth, that accidental slip of a stone blade at an ancient meal, tilting one consistent way. We have the stones themselves, the old flakes struck from a core, leaning in their thousands toward a right-handed hand that turned them. We have the twist inside the skull, the faint lopsided cast of the brain pressed into the bone. We have the arm of a Neanderthal, one shoulder built thicker than the other from a lifetime of favoring one side. And now we have art. We have hands, 5 separate windows into the deep past. Teeth, stone, brain, bone, and painted rock, opened by different people in different lands, using completely different methods. None of them checking the other's work, and every single one of them looks out on the same view. Every one of them shows the same thing, the same ancient patient lean to the right. That is a powerful place to have arrived, because when 5 unrelated lines of evidence all whisper the same word, you can start to believe it. The rightward tilt is not a habit of the modern world. It is not schooling or fashion or the shape of our doorknobs and our scissors. It is old. It is real. It was there in the caves and in the bones and in the teeth, running back and back and back into the dark for 1,000,000 years and more. We have established that it is true, and so gently the question begins to change. All night we've been asking when and how far back, and the trail has answered us at every turn. But now that we know the lean is this old and this deep, a new and harder question steps quietly out of the shadows. Not when anymore. Why? Why us? And why the right? And why at all? And the road toward that answer begins in the strangest place of all, not out in the world, not on any cave wall, but inside your own head, in a small odd fact about how the brain is wired to the very hands that made all these marks, because your right hand, it turns out, is not run by the side of your brain you might expect. Rest here a moment, and we'll follow that crossed and curious wire together. So we've stood at 5 separate windows now, and through every one of them, the same figure leans quietly to the right. That's a remarkable thing to have proven, lying here in the dark. But proving that something is true is not the same as understanding why, and to understand why, we have to leave the caves and the fossil beds behind and travel somewhere much closer, Somewhere you're carrying with you right now, at this very moment, resting on your pillow. We have to go inside your own head, and the first thing we find there is genuinely strange. Because here is the fact, and I want you to sit with it for a moment. The right hand that you reach with, the hand that holds the pen and turns the key and lifts the spoon, that hand is not controlled by the right side of your brain. It's controlled by the left, and your left hand, the quieter one, is run by the right side of your brain. The two are swapped, crossed over. Your body is wired from the very top, like a reflection in a mirror. Isn't that odd? You'd expect the right side to handle the right, the left to handle the left. Neat, tidy. Same side talks to same side. But that's not how we're built. Somewhere between the thought and the movement, the wires cross the midline and come out on the wrong side. The half of your brain sitting above your right ear is right now minding the hand on your left, and the half above your left ear is minding your right. Try it if you like in the quiet. Wiggle the fingers of your right hand, just barely, just enough to feel them stir against the sheet. That small ripple of movement did not begin on the right. It began over on the left, deep behind your left temple, and then it traveled all the way across before it ever reached your hand. Every time you've written your name, caught a falling glass, threaded a needle, that instruction has been making the same crossing quietly your whole life, and you never once felt the switch. Let me describe how that actually happens, because it's soon simpler and stranger than you might think. When your brain decides to move a hand, it sends a signal, a little pulse of instruction, down through a bundle of nerve fibers. Think of these fibers as cables running down out of the brain toward the spine. Now, they don't run straight down their own side of the body. Instead, low down, right at the base of the brain, in the place where the brain narrows and becomes the spinal cord. That stalk we call the brain stem. The main cables reach a crossing point, and there most of them swap. The bundle that started on the left side crosses over to the right. The bundle from the right crosses to the left. They trade places and then continue down the body on the opposite side from where they began. Scientists have a lovely old-fashioned name for that crossing point. They call it the decussation, from a Latin word for the shape of the letter X. Two lines meeting and crossing. We won't lean on the term. We'll just call it the crossing, because that's exactly what it is. And it isn't only the hands. Almost all of our major movement pathways cross over like this. The left brain broadly runs the right side of the body. The right brain runs the left. A whole nervous system folded across itself like crossed arms. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because this one strange fact quietly rewrites everything we've been talking about all night. If your right hand is really just a puppet worked by the left half of your brain, then right-handedness was never truly about the hand at all. Sit with that. All this evidence, the scratched teeth, the leaning stone tools, the lopsided skulls. We've been reading it as a story about hands, but the hand doesn't decide anything. The hand does what it's told. What we've actually been tracing across 2 million years of bone and stone is which half of the brain took charge of skilled, delicate movement. And in 9 out of 10 of us, it's the left half. That's what right-handed really means underneath. Not a preference in the fingers, but a dominance in the brain. Left hemisphere command of fine motor control. The hand is only the puppet. The left hemisphere is the one holding the strings, pulling them down through that crossing in the brainstem out to the fingers on the far side. Which leaves us with a beautiful nagging question. Why? Why is any of it crossed? Why would nature take a perfectly sensible arrangement and flip it over so that every instruction has to travel to the wrong side before it can do its job? It seems, if anything, like extra work, a design a careful engineer would never choose. And here I have to be honest with you. In the gentle way this deep science asks of us, we don't fully know. This one is still in part a genuine puzzle. Researchers have proposed several explanations over the years, and none of them is settled. None has quite closed the case. But there's a leading idea, and it's a strange and lovely one. So let me offer it softly. The crossing may be extraordinarily old, far older than us, older than hands, older than fingers, older than anything that would recognize itself in a mirror. The thinking goes that somewhere back in the deep origins of the vertebrates, the great family of backboned animals hundreds of millions of years ago, the basic nervous system got mapped onto the body with a kind of flip built into it, a twist near the head end, so early and so foundational that everything built afterward simply inherited it. And once a quirk like that is woven into the very floor plan of the body, it doesn't get undone. It just gets passed on and on and on, which would mean the crossing in your brainstem isn't a human trait at all. It's a family heirloom. The same crossing runs in fish, in lizards, in the mouse asleep in the wall, a deep shared inheritance from the ancient blueprint we all still carry. It may not be the whole answer, but it's the direction many researchers are looking. So that's the wiring, the left brain ruling the right hand across an ancient crossing nobody fully understands. But settle in, because this is where the trail turns, and turns towards something wonderful. We've just said the left hemisphere is the specialist, the master of fine, skilled, deliberate movement, the half that came to steer the dominant hand in most of us. And a natural question follows, the kind that tugs you gently towards staying awake just a little longer. If the left hemisphere is where such careful, precise, uniquely human skill lives, then what else set up house in there, right beside it? Because that same left half of the brain, the one quietly running your right hand tonight, turns out to be home to something else, something that may be the most human thing about us of all. We'll open that door next. For now, though, let it go. There's nothing to do with any of this. As you lie here, still and heavy and nearly asleep, those crossed cables are simply humming along without you, carrying their small, faithful signals down through the dark of the brainstem, over the ancient crossing, and out to your resting fingers. The left side of your brain minding your right hand exactly as it has minded the hands of countless people before you. A wiring plan older than tools, older than caves, older even than fingers themselves, quietly at work while you drift. So here we are at the edge of that promise. The left hemisphere, we said, is the specialist, the side that runs the skilled, practiced, dominant right hand, the side that minds the fingers, doing the delicate work. And we hinted that it does not do this work alone, that it shares its house with something else, something that more than almost anything makes us who we are. It shares it with words. Think about that for a moment. Lying there in the dark, the part of your brain that guides your right hand as it signs your name, threads a needle, turns a key. That same left hemisphere is also in most people where language lives. Not the whole of it, not neatly bricked off, but largely dominantly there. Speech, the machinery of words, the quiet engine that right now is turning these sounds into meaning as you drift. It runs for most of us on the same side that runs the favored hand. There's even a famous patch of it, a region low in the left frontal lobe, the front part of the brain, just behind the forehead, that helps assemble speech, helps turn thought into spoken words. It has a name, Broca's area, after the doctor who first hied damage there to the loss of fluent speech, and it sits on the left, the same left. Let me give you the numbers because they're gentle and strange. In right-handers, that great 90% we've been following all night. Language is handled mainly by the left hemisphere in around 95 out of every 100 people, almost everyone. The dominant hand and the dominant tongue keeping to the same side over and over across nearly the whole population. And here's the part that makes you tilt your head. Even among left-handers, the ones whose bodies lean the other way, language still lives mostly on the left, for something like 70 to 75% of them. So even most lefties are, when it comes to words, left-trained. The word does not simply follow the hand, it has its own strong preference. And that preference is the same direction, just not as absolutely. Now, if you're the kind of mind that likes a good story, and if you're still awake, you probably are, there's a beautiful one waiting right here. It goes like this. Maybe these two things grew up together. Maybe the fine control of the hand and the fine control of speech are not neighbors by accident, but by blood. Picture the deep past. A hominin sitting by a stream, turning a stone, striking a flake, shaping a tool with small, precise movements of the right hand. Those very movements we followed through the teeth and the stones hundreds of thousands of years back. That skill lived in the left hemisphere, and speech too is a kind of fine motor performance. The tongue, the lips, the breath, 100 tiny muscles firing in exact sequence, faster than you can think about it. So the idea is that the same neural machinery honed for skilled gesture and tool-making was over immense stretches of time, borrowed, repurposed, reused to shape sound instead of stone. Some researchers call this a motor origins idea, that the circuits for the hand may have helped give rise to the circuits for the tongue, that in a sense we talked with our hands. We gestured and pointed and shaped the air long before we shaped words, and when words came, they moved into a house the hand had already built. It's a lovely picture, the chip of flint and the spoken syllable born of the same careful side of the brain. You can almost feel it wanting to be true. But here is where the honest part comes in, because this is contested living science, and the tidy story has run into some trouble. In recent years, researchers have been able to do something the old anatomists never could. They've looked at handedness and language side, not in one patient at a time, but across tens of thousands of people in huge data sets, measuring which hand a person favors and which hemisphere lights up for language, and asking how tightly the two actually go together. And the answer, when it came, was a little humbling. The link is real. It is genuinely there, but it is surprisingly weak. Handedness, it turns out, explains only a tiny sliver of the variation in which side does your language. A thin thread, not a rope. Knowing which hand someone writes with tells you very little about which hemisphere holds their words. The two are related, yes, but they are not the same switch. One does not simply throw the other. You can be strongly right-handed and left-lateralized for speech, which is the common case, but the connection between those two facts is far looser than the neat story wants it to be. They lean the same way far more often than chance would allow, and yet most of the time they lean for reasons we can't fully trace to each other. And there's a deeper nuance, one that makes the whole thing shimmer a little. It may be that handedness, the preference for manipulating objects, for gripping the stone, wielding the tool, holding the pen, is simply a different thing from the lateralization of communicative gesture, the waving and pointing and shaping that shades into language. Those two may not ride on the same neural system at all. The hand that does work and the hand that talks may be governed by different circuits, tilting the same direction, but for their own separate reasons. So the clean equation, we were tempted by the hand hemisphere equals the language hemisphere is too simple. The picture underneath is subtler and honestly stranger, which leaves us not with an answer, but with a better question. And I think that's the more beautiful place to be. Maybe the hand and the word are not twins, born together from a single cause, with one giving rise to the other in a straight, clean line. Maybe they're something more like cousins. Cousins raised in the same house, sharing a side, sharing a long history, sharing perhaps some of the same deep family resemblance, but each with a life of its own. We can see them again and again, leaning the same way, far more often than any coin flip would predict. The right hand and the speaking left brain keeping company down the generations. We just can't yet say, with any honesty, exactly why, whether one shaped the other, or whether both were shaped by something older still, some deeper tilt in how we're built that expresses itself now in the hand, now in the tongue. There's a quiet wonder in not knowing, in sitting with the fact that the two most human things about you, the hand that makes and the mouth that speaks, keep to the same side of your skull, night after night, life after life, and that we've noticed the pattern for well over a century and still can't fully explain it. The story we wanted was too tidy. The truth is looser and richer and not yet finished. But notice what's begun to happen as we've gone deeper. We started with hands. Then we followed the hands into the brain, into the cross-wiring, into this strange left-leaning company. The hand keeps with language. And each step has taken us further inward from the tool to the hemisphere, from the hemisphere towards something even smaller and more fundamental. Because behind all of this, behind which hand and which side and which history, there's a question we haven't touched yet. Why you, specifically? Why your hand and not some other? And to reach for that, we have to go all the way down past the brain, past the wiring, into the tiny coiled instructions written in every cell of you, into the search for something people have hunted for a long time, a gene. And for a long time, that was the dream. One gene, a single tidy instruction handed down from a parent, like the color of your eyes, quietly deciding whether you'd reach with the left or the right. It's such a satisfying idea. You can almost picture it. A little switch, tucked somewhere in the coil of your DNA, flipped one way in most of us, the other way in a rare few. If your grandmother was left-handed, well, there it is. The gene traveling down the generations, surfacing again in you. But that switch was never found. People looked. For decades, geneticists went hunting for the single left-handed gene, combing through family trees, comparing parents and children, sequencing what they could, and it simply wasn't there. Not because they missed it, because it doesn't exist. There is no one gene for handedness. In the same way, there's no one gene for how tall you are or how your face is shaped. Instead, handedness turns out to be what scientists call polygenic, and that word just means many genes. Not one loud voice, but a whole quiet crowd. Dozens of genes, maybe more. Each one nudging the odds a little. A tiny push this way, a tiny push that way. None of them deciding on its own. Each one just leaning on the scale by a feather's weight. And the sum of all those feathers is the hand you're resting on the pillow right now. And here's the part that surprises almost everyone. Even added all together, the genes don't explain very much. When researchers measure how much of the variation in handedness comes down to inheritance, a quantity they call heritability, just a way of asking how much of the difference between people is written in their DNA, the answer is only about a quarter, around 25%. which means the other 3/4 of the story isn't in your genes at all. It's somewhere else. It's in the long, strange months in the womb. It's in development, in the way your growing body folded and settled and made 1,000 small choices before you were born. It's in chance, pure, ordinary chance. Let that one settle for a moment, because it's stranger than it sounds. Take identical twins, 2 people who began as a single cell, sharing every last letter of their DNA, as genetically alike as 2 humans can possibly be. And yet you can find pairs of identical twins where one favors the right hand and the other favors the left. Same genes, same parents, same house, different hands. Whatever tipped them apart, it wasn't written in the code they share. It happened later, in the quiet, in the growing, a coin that landed differently for each of them before either had a name. So, the genes are only a small part, but they are a real part, and the ones we found are stranger and more beautiful than a simple switch would ever have been. Take one of the first to be flagged, a gene with the unlowly name PCSK6. What's remarkable about it isn't handedness directly, it's what else it does. PCSK6 is tangled up in the machinery that sets up the body's left-right axis very, very early. The axis just being the invisible line down your middle that sorts your body into a left side and the right side. This is deep, ancient signaling happening in the first days and weeks of an embryo long before there's anything you'd recognize as a person. Part of that signaling involves a molecule called nodal. Think of it as one of the earliest messengers that whispers to the developing body which way is which. The same conversation that helps decide which side your heart will sit on, which side your stomach goes, and your liver. And PCSK6 helps switch that messenger on. Interestingly, some studies tie it less to which hand you favor and more to how strongly you favor it. The degree of your handedness, whether you're firmly one-sided or somewhere nearer the middle. And then there's a newer clue, one that only came into focus recently. When scientists gained the ability to read through huge numbers of people's genes, looking for the rare, unusual variants, the uncommon spelling changes that most of us don't carry. When they did that, a certain family of genes kept surfacing among left-handers, genes for tubulins. And to see why that's astonishing, you need to know what a tubulin is. So, let me tell you plainly. Tubulins are the proteins that build microtubules, and a microtubule is one of the most important little things inside you that you never thought about. Picture the inside of a single cell, not empty, but crisscrossed with tiny scaffolding, a framework of hollow rods that hold the cell in shape and act as railways, tracks that cargo gets carried along from one end of the cell to the other. Those are microtubules, the internal architecture and the transport system of every cell in your body, all at once. One of those tubulant genes is called TUB4B, and rare variants in it turn up notably more often in left-handers than you'd expect by chance. Now, why on earth would the cell's inner scaffolding have anything to do with which hand you write with? Here's the thread that ties it together. Those same microtubules also builds cilia, and cilia are tiny hair-like structures that stick out from the surface of certain cells and wave or beat back and forth. And in the very early embryo, a patch of these little cilia does something quietly miraculous. They beat together, all leaning the same way, and they stir the fluid around them in one consistent direction. That gentle one-way current is one of the first things that tells the growing body which side is left and which is right. It's how the asymmetry gets set. So if the scaffolding that builds those cilia is slightly different, the whole left-right sorting might tilt with it. And this is the big, beautiful picture that these threads are starting to draw. The very same deep biology that decides which side of your chest your heart beats on may also be the biology that tilts which hand you reach with. Handedness might not be its own separate thing at all. It might be just one visible expression, the one you can watch, the one that shows up every time you pick up a spoon, of a whole body leftness and rightness that was decided incredibly early, before you had fingers to prefer, before you were recognizably you. Remember way back the idea that this was never really about the hand, that you have a leaning body, a favored foot, a dominant eye, a preferred ear, a self that tips as a whole. This is where that idea reaches all the way down. The lean isn't painted on late like a habit. It may be set in the very first architecture of you, in the stirring of a droplet of fluid in a body no bigger than a grain of rice. But, and it's a gentle, but the kind to fall asleep on, we have found threads. Not the whole tapestry. Real genes, real signals, PCSK6, TUB4B, a scattering of others, each one genuine, each one telling us something true, and yet, stitched all together, they still explain only that modest slice. Most of why you specifically ended up reaching with the hand you reach with is still unwritten, still dark. Science has lit a few small lamps in a very large room, and by their light we can just make out the shapes of things, the axis, the cilia, the ancient signaling, but the far walls are still lost in shadow. We know more than we did. We're nowhere near the end. And there's one shape in that darkness we haven't touched yet, something that should, if you stop and think about it, not make any sense at all. Because if right-handedness is this dominant, this deep, this ancient, stitched into our biology from the first days in the womb, older than our species, older than fire, then why are there any left-handers left? Why didn't they simply vanish, ground away over 1 million years, until everyone reached the same way? They didn't vanish. They're still here, stubbornly, reliably, about 1 in 10, and that refusal to disappear may be the biggest clue of all. About 1 in 10. That's the number that won't go away. And to feel why it's so strange, you have to think for a moment about how evolution actually works. Slowly, over enormous stretches of time. Here's the rough rule. If a trait cost you something, if it makes you a little worse at surviving, or a little less likely to have children who survive, then evolution tends to grind it down. Not overnight, not in a lifetime, but over thousands of generations. The disadvantaged version quietly becomes rarer and rarer until one day it's almost gone. Given enough time, a real handicap gets erased, and we are not short on time here. We've already followed this right-hand lean back nearly 2 million years, older than our species, older than fire-mastered, older than words as we know them. 1 million years and more is an ocean of generations. That is more than enough time to wash left-handedness away completely. If it were simply a mistake, simply the losing side of a coin, and yet it holds, not flickering, not fading, roughly 1 in 10, steady as a heartbeat in culture after culture, in age after age, wherever you dwells. Allowed to count it honestly. When something refuses to disappear like that, when it sits at the same stubborn share across the whole world and across the deep past, it usually means something is holding it there. A door isn't staying open by accident. Someone or something has a hand against it. So, what could be holding the door? The leading answer is strange and a little thrilling, and it's called the fighting hypothesis. Let it unfold slowly. Picture a world, the world of our ancestors, where nearly everyone is right-handed. You grow up in that world. You wrestle your brothers. You spar, you train, you fight. And every single person you ever face reaches and strikes with their right hand. Their moves become second nature to you. You learn, without ever being taught, exactly where a blow tends to come from, which shoulder drops, before a swing, which side to guard. Your whole body is quietly rehearsed for one kind of opponent, and then one day you face a left-hander. Everything is wrong. Everything arrives from the side you never learned to watch. The attack comes off the unexpected shoulder, along a line your reflexes have no memory of, in a deuce-friendly scuffle that's just a surprise. But in real close combat, in a duel, with sharpened stone or bone, in the kind of fight where a single unguarded instant is the difference between walking away and not, that surprise is a genuine edge. The rare left-hander, precisely because they are rare, is the one nobody has practiced against. And so, in a world that settles its arguments with fists and blades, being the odd one out could actually help you survive and win, and go on to have children who carry that same rare wiring. Now here is the beautiful part. The part that makes the whole thing balance. Notice that this advantage depends entirely on being rare. It only works because left-handers are unusual, because right-handers so seldom meet one that they never learn the counter. So imagine what happens if lefties start winning and multiplying, and their share creeps up. 10%, 20, 30. Suddenly, a right-hander faces left-handers, often. Suddenly, those unexpected angles aren't unexpected anymore. Everyone has sparred against southpaws. Everyone knows the moves. The surprise wears off. And the moment the surprise is gone, so is the advantage. Which means left-handedness can never take over. The very success that would make it common is the thing that destroys its edge. It's self-limiting. Push the share too high, and the benefit collapses, and it drifts back down. Let it fall too low, and rare fighters win again, and it climbs back up. It settles gently at some low but stable slice of the population, held in place from both sides. Scientists have a name for this kind of seesaw, where a trait wins only as long as it stays rare, and loses its power the moment it becomes common. They call it negative frequency-dependent selection. The clumsy phrase hides a simple idea: rare beats common, until rare stops being rare, and then the whole thing balances. Now, this is deep time reasoning, and we can't climb into a time machine to watch two ancestors duel, but we can look for echoes of it, and there's one that's hard to ignore. Look at where left-handers turn up today, in unusual numbers. It's in the interactive combat-like contests, the ones where you win by surprising a single opponent, face-to-face, under pressure, with no time to think. Boxing, fencing, baseball, pitching, tennis, cricket, bowling. In these sports, left-handers appear far more often than their roughly 1 in 10 share of the population would predict. The southpaw in the ring, the left-handed pitcher, the awkward fencer, all of them living off the same old advantage, the opponent who has trained 1,000 hours against righties and only a handful against them. And here's the detail that makes it more than a coincidence, that over-representation fades away in sports where you aren't reacting to an opponent at all. Gymnastics, darts, the contests where it's just you and the apparatus. No unexpected angle to exploit, no mind to catch off guard. There, left-handers show up at about the ordinary rate. It's specifically the duel-like games, the ones that reward surprise, where being rare pays. Some studies have gone further and tried to link left-handedness directly to success in real fighting. None of this is proof, and it's worth saying that plainly. It's suggestion, a pattern in modern play that rhymes with an ancient story. But it rhymes rather well, of course. If left-handedness only ever helped, it wouldn't stay a minority at all. For a real balance, there has to be a cost on the other side of the scale. And some studies do hint at small costs that may travel with left-handedness, slightly higher rates of certain accidents, or of some developmental issues in some datasets. It's genuinely contested, and it would be wrong to overstate it, so hold it lightly. But the shape of the idea is elegant. If there is a modest cost to being left-handed, and a rarity advantage in a world of conflict on the dot, then the two can offset each other. The cost keeps left-handers from becoming common. The fighting edge keeps them from vanishing. And so both kinds of hand persist together, neither driven out, held in a genuine evolutionary trade-off, a balance rather than a winner-take-all. Which brings us softly to the resolution, that 90-10 split we started with, the one that felt like a loose end, like an eraser evolution had somehow left unfinished. Maybe nothing of the kind. It may not be an accident, and it may not be a job half done. It may be an equilibrium. An equilibrium just means a resting point, a place where opposing pressures cancel out and the numbers stop moving. The way a scale comes to rest when the weights on each side match, a long, quiet truce between two strategies, the common and the rare. The majority reaches with the right, sure, and familiar, and everywhere. The minority reaches with the left, unusual, unexpected, occasionally decisive. Neither one wins completely. Neither one is supposed to. The ratio itself is the answer. 90 and 10 is not a fraction of the population that hasn't finished sorting itself out. It may be the stable bargain our species struck long ago and has carried almost unchanged ever since. It's a satisfying thought to lie with. The left-hander beside you, or maybe the left hand at the end of your own arm, isn't a leftover or a rounding error. It's one half of a balance older than history, kept alive by the very fact of being rare. And yet, notice what we've actually explained tonight, and what we still haven't touched. We've asked why left-handers survive, and found a reason they might. But that answer quietly assumed the thing we most want to understand. It assumed a world already tipped to the right. A world where being left-handed is the rare exception worth exploiting. We've explained why the minority holds. We have not explained the majority. We still haven't asked the deepest question of all, the one under everything. Why did our whole species lean to the right in the first place when no other ape ever did? What happened so long ago to tilt an entire kind of creature to one side? That's where the road goes next. And so we arrive at the largest question of the night, the one we've been circling for hours, the one that sits underneath all the others, waiting patiently in the dark. Let's say it plainly, because it's easy to lose in all the wonder. It isn't strange that an individual creature has a favorite hand. Lots of animals do. A cat reaches into a gap with the same paw again and again. A parrot lifts food to its beak with the same foot. Your neighbor's dog offers the same paw for a treat every single time. Preference on its own is ordinary. It's everywhere in the living world. No, the strange thing, the thing we keep coming back to, is that our whole species leans the same way together, not scattered, not split down the middle, but nearly 9 in every 10 of us, reaching with the right. A chimpanzee troop doesn't do this. A gorilla family doesn't do this. Those close cousins of ours favor their hands as individuals, one preferring this side, one preferring that. And when you add them all up, the group lands somewhere near an even split. But us, we tipped. As a species, as a whole, we leaned to one side and stayed there. And the question that has no easy answer is simply this: why us? Why did it happen to our line and to no other ape on Earth? The leading answer these days isn't a single event. It's a story. in 2 acts. And the first act is one you already know in your bones, because you did it this morning without a thought. Standing up. Picture our distant ancestors, millions of years ago, beginning to move through the world on 2 legs instead of 4. Bipedalism. That word simply means walking upright, balanced on the 2 feet, the way you walk to the kitchen for a glass of water. It sounds like a small thing. It was anything but, because when you walk on all 4s or swing through branches, your hands are busy, their feet, their grippers and hooks and load bearers, spoken for by the constant work of holding up and moving the body. But stand upright, and something quietly extraordinary happens. The hands fall idle. They're released for the first time. They're no longer needed for getting from here to there. And that freedom is an open door. And into that open door came skill. Hands that no longer had to carry the weight of the body could be handed over to other things, to carrying food back to a camp instead of eating it where it fell, to making, to shaping, to the slow, deliberate work of turning a stone into a tool, to throwing, to processing a meal with care. All the patient repeated precise tasks that would come to define what our kind does with its hands. The upright body set the hands loose, and the hands went looking for work. That's Act 1. Now the second. Over the long ages that followed, our brains did something almost as dramatic as our bodies had. They grew. They swelled and expanded slowly across enormous stretches of time. And as they grew, they specialized. Different jobs began to settle onto different sides. Scientists have a word for that settling, and it's a useful one to keep. Lateralize. To lateralize simply means to let one side of the brain take charge of a particular job, rather than sharing it evenly across both halves. You met this earlier tonight when we talked about language leaning to the left. That's lateralization, a job finding a home on one side. Now put the 2 acts together and feel how they lock. Here are hands newly freed for skilled work by an upright body, and here is a brain increasingly willing to hand a specific job to one hemisphere rather than splitting it down the middle. Freed hands me a lateralizing brain under those conditions, and perhaps only under those conditions a preference doesn't just flicker in scattered individuals. It can crystallize. It can harden across the whole species and tip strongly toward one side. And here's where something recent and rather lovely comes in. In the last little while, some researchers have been building models of primate handedness. Not just us, but monkeys and apes across the family tree, trying to work out what makes the human pattern so odd. And they folded in 2 particular ingredients. The first is overall brain size, how big the brain grew, and the second is a quiet, almost hidden number that anatomists have long used as a fingerprint, the ratio of arm length to leg length. That one takes a moment to appreciate. Think about a creature built for swinging through trees, an ape with long, powerful arms and shorter legs. Now think about a creature built for walking upright across open ground with longer legs, seek, beneath it, and arms it no longer leans on. The proportions of arm to leg tell you at a glance how committed a body is to standing and walking on 2 feet. It's a bodily signature of bipedalism written in the very lengths of the bones. And when the researchers added those 2 things, brain size and that arm-to-leg proportion into their models, something remarkable happened. The human pattern stopped looking exceptional. It stopped standing out as the great weird outlier of the primate world. Those 2 factors seem to account for our unusual population-wide lean to the right in a way they simply couldn't for the other primates. In plainer words, a bigger brain and a body committed to walking upright may be exactly the combination that tipped us over. The very things that made us human may be the very things that made us right-handed. And there's a deeper logic humming underneath all of this, one worth resting on. Why lateralize at all? Why let one side of the brain take charge instead of doing everything evenly on both? The answer may come down to simple efficiency. If one hemisphere dedicates itself to fine motor skill, to the delicate control of a skilled hand, then the other hemisphere is freed to specialize in something else entirely. Language, say, leaning to the left, as you heard earlier, splitting the labor between the two. A halves of the brain may just be a better bargain than duplicating everything twice over, one copy on each side. A brain that divides its work can carry more. Lateralization, then as a kind of cognitive bargain, a quiet trade struck deep in our making, and handedness, the pen finding your right hand, is simply one visible symptom of that bargain. One thing you can see, poking up above the surface, of a much larger deal done long ago. Now hold all of this gently, because as beautiful as it is, this is a leading idea, an attractive synthesis, not a closed case. Researchers still argue over the details. Models are simplifications, careful sketches of a reality that is always richer and messier than any sketch. And the very deepest question of all still sits there unanswered. Why the right specifically? Why did we tip to that side and not the other? The upright body and the swelling brain may explain why we tipped so hard, so together. They don't yet fully explain the direction. That particular door is still closed, and no one is quite sure what's behind it. But settle on this thought as you lie there. To be right-handed, if this story holds, is to carry the consequences of two of the oldest chapters in the whole long tale of becoming human. The day unimaginably distant when our ancestors rose up onto 2 feet and set their hands free, and the slow, patient million-year swelling of the brain that followed. 2 ancient chapters folded quietly into the way you reach for things. The pen resting in your hand tonight, the spoon, the light switch, the edge of the blanket. It is in a sense the far end of that story, the newest twig on a branch that runs back into deep time. And yet the tale isn't finished, because we had both spent all this while in bone and brain and body, in the hard evidence of what happened. But there's another whole world wrapped around all of this, the world of what we made of it, the meanings and the myths, the strange old fears about the left hand, the things we still argue over and cannot answer. That's where the road runs now, into the last of the night. And here is where the story softens and turns strange. Because for all that we've followed the right hand back through bone and stone and the coiled shape of the brain, the left hand has its own history, not a history of biology, but of feeling of fear. Even for a very long time, across a great many cultures scattered far apart, the left was the side people learned to distrust, the unlucky side, the unclean one, the hand you were quietly told to keep to yourself. You can hear that old suspicion still folded right into the words we use, though almost nobody notices it anymore. The Latin word for the left side was sinister. Yes, that word, the one we now reach for when we mean something menacing, something not quite right, a shadow at the edge of a room. It began simply as a direction, left, and over the centuries it darkened until it stopped, meaning a side of the body at all, and started meaning a kind of dread. And the right, the Latin for the right side, was dexter. From that single word we get dexterity, skill, deftness, a sure and clever hand. From its cousins we get adroit, which is really just to the right, meaning capable, graceful, good at things. So the language itself keeps the old scorecard. Right is skillful, Left is sinister, a prejudice so ancient it hid inside the dictionary and rode along quietly for 2,000 years. And it wasn't only in the words, in tradition after tradition. The right hand became the hand of blessing, the hand you offered in greeting, the hand you ate with at the table. The left was kept apart, set aside for lesser and less mentionable tasks. Different peoples, different faiths, different corners of the map, and yet again and again, the same lopsided honor. The right raised up, and the left pushed gently into the dark. Hold on to that. We'll come back to how odd it is that everyone landed on the same side, because this distrust had real weight in real lives. For generations, if a child was born reaching with the left hand, the world set about correcting it. In schools especially, and often not gently, the left hand might be tied down, or slapped, or simply forbidden, and the child made to write and sew and work with the right, whether or not the right ever truly wanted the job. This went on in many places, well into living memory. And here's the thing that makes it matter for our story. It actually shows up in the numbers in populations where left-handedness was suppressed. Hardest, the measured rate of left-handers dipped. It fell below that steady 10%, sometimes far below, as if the trait were being quietly erased. But it wasn't being erased. It was only being hidden, because across the 20th century, as tolerance slowly returned, and children were let alone to reach with whichever hand they pleased, the numbers climbed right back, up and up, until they settled again near that familiar figure, roughly 1 in 10. And think about what that rebound is actually telling you. If left-handedness could be trained out of people for good, it would have stayed low. It would have withered instead. The moment the pressure lifted, it welled straight back up to where it had always been, like water finding its level. You can bend the statistic for a while. You can lean on it with schools and shame and a very long tradition of suspicion, but you can't hold it down. The 10% keeps returning, which means it was never really put there by culture in the first place. It comes from somewhere deeper, somewhere teaching can't reach, and that quietly is one of the loveliest clues in the whole night's argument. Think of how different human cultures are from one another. Different languages, different gods, different foods, different ideas about nearly everything that matters. And yet, wherever you look, wherever the left hand isn't being actively forced away, that same rough 90-10 split appears. In every society, ever carefully studied over and over. Now, when a thing changes from culture to culture, it's usually cultural. It's something we made up and passed along. But when a thing stays the same across cultures that share almost nothing else, that's the fingerprint of biology. That's the mark of something written into us before the cultures ever formed. The steadiness itself is the evidence. And it's a fitting bookend, isn't it, to everything we've traced tonight. The teeth, the stone flakes, the twist in the skull, the hands on the cave wall, all of it pointing the same way. The 9 and the 1 holding their shape across the whole human world. So, we've come a very long way. And yet, and this is the honest part, the part worth sitting with as you drift, there is still so much we simply do not know. It would be easy to end the night pretending the case is closed. It isn't. Let me lay the open questions out plainly, because they're real and they're still waiting. The first is the deepest. Why the right? Not why we have a bias. We've built a fair case for that. But why it points to the right side specifically rather than the left. As far as anyone can tell, a world of 90% left-handers would have worked just as well. The machinery doesn't seem to care which way it tips, only that it tips. And yet, it tipped right almost everywhere for nearly 2 million years. Nobody can say for certain why. It may be an accident, frozen in very early then, carried forward simply because it was already there, but that's a guess, wearing the clothes of an answer. The second is a question of proportion. How much of your handedness is written in your genes? How much is shaped by the long, strange process of you developing in the first place? And how much is just chance? A coin the body flipped before you were born. We know it's some of each. We know the genes explain only a modest share, but the exact recipe, the true balance of inheritance and development and luck, still slips through our fingers. The third is that crossing. Remember it. The right hand, run by the left side of the brain. The cables, swapping sides deep in the brainstem. We can describe it beautifully. We still can't fully explain why the wiring crosses over at all, why nature built us mirror, reversed inside. The answer seems to reach back to the very earliest animals with backbones. And there it goes, dim. And the fourth is that neat, tempting story of the hand and the word growing up together in the same hemisphere. It's partly true, but only partly. The link turned out to be real and surprisingly loose. Two cousins raised in one house, rather than a single switch throwing both. Why only partly? We don't really know that either. And around these firm mysteries drift a few softer ones. Little loose ends too lovely to tie off. Identical twins who share their whole genetic script can still end up with different dominant hands, and sometimes they come out as near mirror images of one another, one reaching left where the other reaches right, as if a single pattern got printed twice and flipped. Then there's the fact that the whole body has a sidedness to it, a left and a right that aren't the same. Your heart sits off to the left. Your gut coils in a particular direction, not its reverse, and handedness seems to ride quietly alongside all of that. One more expression of a body that was never truly symmetrical to begin with, and out beyond us, some other animals show faint hints of a favored paw or a favored limb. A cat, a parrot, a mouse, though almost never that strong. Whole species lean to one side that seems to belong to us alone. Loose threads, all of them. Nobody has followed them to the end. So maybe this is the real gift of digging so deep. Not certainty, the opposite almost, because the further down we've gone tonight, the more ancient and genuine and real this little split has looked. And at the very same time, the more clearly, only half understood. We can chase it further than almost anyone would ever guess. Back past writing, past our own species, down into a jaw nearly 2 million years old, and we still don't reach the bottom of it. It's still there, under everything, quiet and unexplained in the hand resting beside you right now. So let it rest there for a moment, that hand beside you in the dark. Whatever it's holding tonight, a pen you meant to put down an hour ago, a spoon, the cool edge of the blanket, or just the warmth of the other hand. Notice one last time which one it is. For most of you, it's the right. And now you know that this small, ordinary thing is not small at all. It's the near end of a thread that runs back further than almost anything else about you. Follow it back with me, one final time, slowly, the way you trace a river upstream in the last minutes before sleep. From your right hand tonight, back to the hands pressed against cold cave walls 30,000 years ago, left palms flattened on the rock, while the right hand blew a mist of ochre around them. A whole gallery of people saying without meaning to which hand they trusted. Back further past the thicker, stronger right arm of a Neanderthal who lived and died and was buried long before our kind ever reached that valley. Back past the faint lopsided twist inside old skulls, the right front and the left rear, each leaning a little forward, a brain's quiet signature pressed into bone. Back past the tiny angled scratches on worn front teeth, left by a stone blade slipping at some ancient meal. All the way down, down through the layers, down through the hundreds of thousands of years, to a single upper jaw, lying in an African gorge, nearly 2 million years old, its front teeth scratched on the diagonal by a right hand that reached the way yours reaches now. That's the whole night, gathered into one line, one unbroken reach. And here is the wonder of it, said plainly, without stretching it past what we truly know. That rightward lean of yours is one of the oldest and most consistent signatures of being human that we have ever found. Not a habit of the modern age, not a thing school taught us or writing taught us. It was already there, written into bone and stone, and painted onto rock, long, long before anyone carved the first word. When you reach with your right hand tonight, you are doing something almost unimaginably old. You are joined in that one plain gesture to a chain of hands reaching the same way across a depth of time so vast the mind can't quite hold it. Toolmakers by ancient streams, hunters in Ice Age Europe, a cousin species now gone, all of them reaching, more often than not, to the same side you favor as you lie here. And yet this is the part I love most. We still cannot fully explain it. We can trace it with astonishing care. We can read it from a scratch on a tooth and a twist in a skull and the shadow of a hand on a wall. We can follow it down through the genes and the cross-wiring and the old story of standing up and growing a larger brain. But when you ask the simplest questions of all, why to the right and not the left? Why 90 and 10 and not some other number? What the whole cause really is? The honest answer is still that we don't entirely know. An ancient split we clearly carry, a split we clearly puzzle over, and somehow those two things sit together without any quarrel at all. Let that be a comfort tonight, not a frustration. You don't have to solve it. Isn't it a lovely thing that something can be this old, this real, this much a part of you, and still keep a little of its secret? You get to carry the mystery without having to answer it. You can just let it be true. Before you drift off entirely, let me ask a few small things of you gently, the way a friend would, with no rush at all. If this journey kept you company tonight, it would mean a great deal if you'd tap the like button before you sleep. It's a tiny thing, and it genuinely helps these quiet histories find other people lying awake in the dark. And if you'd like more nights like this one, more slow wanders back into the deep past, do consider subscribing, so the next one finds its way to you. But most of all, if you have a moment before your eyes close, I'd love it if you left a comment telling us where in the world you'd re-listening from, and what time it is there right now. Late evening, maybe the small hours, first light on the far side of the planet. I ask because I love to picture it. All of us scattered across the whole turning world in different cities and different seasons and different times of night. And yet all of us here together, drifting off to the same quiet story, each with a hand resting easy on the blanket. When you tell us where you are, you help the rest of us see that whole picture. So say hello, let us know you're there. And one last small thing, more of a PS from a friend than anything else. If you've enjoyed wandering this far back into the deep past, into scratched teeth and painted hands and jaws 2 million years old, you might love the book we made about the secrets of prehistory. It's the same kind of journey, just bound between covers, something to hold in whichever hand you please. You can read more about it and find it over on our website, sleepytimehistory.com. That's all. It'll be there whenever you're curious. Now, let the questions go. You don't need them tonight. Let them settle back down into the quiet layers they came from, the teeth and the stone and the old lopsided skulls, and leave them there until some other evening. And let the hand rest, that right hand of yours, that ancient, faithful, favored hand, Let it grow heavy. Now let the fingers loosen their hold on whatever they were holding. Let the arm go soft and still against the sheets. There's nothing left for it to reach for tonight. Nothing left to grip or slice or press against a wall. It has done its long, long work. 2 million years of it. And now it can simply be still. Feel the weight of that stillness. The whole night is behind you now. The gorge and the caves, the tools and the teeth, the twist in the skull, and the truce of 90 and 10. You can let all of it drift out of focus, soft at the edges, the way the room is already going soft and dim around you. You are one small, warm link in a chain of hands, reaching back almost 2 million years. That's a quiet and lovely thing to carry down into sleep. So carry it gently. Let your breath go slow. Thank you for listening. If you would like to join me for more stories, I would be grateful if you would subscribe. Take care of yourself.